The agenda which I propose is essentially covering the first part of my presentation, and most of you haven't heard about that. This is the first time you learn it, almost ongoing, because when I was preparing the presentation, I realized that there is so much more than I should be saying. First of all, it's not enough to make a diagnosis. One should also propose what is the solution. And it's so much material that I wouldn't be able to squeeze in one meeting. So as you will see, I'll cover it today only these items. Just to refresh for some, what is AI, NAI, AGI, and so on, is artificial intelligence, humanity's blessing or curse, about the Paris and Munich conference, and why are we in such a messy situation? The beginning of diagnosis. And next month, I'll be covering reinventing democracy to enable a better AGI control. And in April, key steps to minimize the existential risk of AGI. So let me start with something that may seem to be obvious, that AI cannot be uninvented. As electricity, nuclear fusion, or airlines. We can no longer stop artificial intelligence. So for those who are not terribly initiated in those acronyms like ANI, AGI, Superintelligence, this is a refresher course. My broad definition of artificial intelligence is that it simulates human intelligence in a machine. We have been familiar with information technology for at least 70 years. And what is information technology? Essentially, data, processes, memory, all those devices and communication links, including the star links, that bring it all together. The key characteristic is that, so this is the AI body. AI still using, will always be using the digital infrastructure. So the information processing in AI differs fundamentally from the information processing in artificial intelligence because it is based on binary decisions, 0, 1, and almost always give the same result. I'm just simplifying it, but generally this is the case. So artificial narrow intelligence, this is the intelligence that surpasses humans in one specific area. And it introduces additionally to what information technology has brought, sensors and neurons, enabling machine learning to make intelligent decisions based, among others, on algorithms. So this is available now. I just want to see you. And I need, okay, fine. So the third element in my jigsaw is talking about artificial general intelligence. That is the new, if you like, emerging artificial intelligence that is self-learning. It's generally much smarter than most humans in almost any situation. It can still make errors. So it surpasses, as I say, human level intelligence in most areas. But the most important though, because there are many differences, so definitions of AGI, but for me, perhaps the easiest one is to remember is that it's something that is smarter than humans. And by that, I mean that if it wanted to get out of a proverbial jail, it will be able to do so. And that is the major threat for us. And I'll be talking about it later on. And finally, so this is almost available. Some people say it may emerge by the end of this year, perhaps next year, but certainly within 2 years, we'll have some sort of artificial general intelligence. And then we have superintelligence, which is self-organizing entity, improving exponentially until it reaches the term borrowed from particle physics, singularity. So something that is described by various authors differently, but essentially it will be exponentially improving its capabilities. So this is going to be a kind of a mind which will probably be conscious, and I consider this as a single entity, a kind of a mesh-like entity spanning all over the globe. And my prediction is that we'll have it between 2025, 40, perhaps in 10 years' time. This has now become earlier by around, in my previous opinion, about 10 years. Some people previously were talking about the end of the century. It's all coming much, much earlier if everything plays out as we expect. I would only like to add regarding this self-learning, which is here within the artificial general intelligence, which we already have actually got it much earlier in 2016 when Alpha 2 was born. That was the AI program that beat the best Go player. But the difference between Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 was that it was left to its own devices and it taught itself how to play Go, not even knowing the rules. So we are now in a different area, and this is the backbone of artificial general intelligence, that it is entering the unsupervised learning. Until now, the most expensive part in AI has been to teach it, apart from the primary inference of what the world is about and so on, how to use the knowledge. It has to be taught. So hundreds of thousands, perhaps, people, students in Africa and so on, have been employed to teach AI how to use its initial knowledge. And in order to make it usable, it has to learn the biases, what is wrong, what is right in terms of communicating. So this is now becoming almost unnecessary, or not necessary as much as before. And it's replaced by unsupervised learning. So AI is more than just technology. In my view, it's a new kind of intelligence. And if you think about this in this category, then a lot becomes clearer why AI can be an enormous help and benefit for humans as well as an existential threat. Therefore, AI is not only the potential amazing benefit bringing us the world of abundance, but also the only existential risk which may itself determine our future. And I split into two options. Either we evolve or we are extinct. I'm extremely adamant about that there is no longer a situation which I mentioned earlier, that we can uninvent AI and we can stop it. There won't be a situation that we can just continue going on as we are. It won't happen. This century, that decision will be made, and it can be made much earlier, within a decade or two, at the latest. That kind of a monumental decision. When I speak about it, I myself scared by the very thought of it. That so few people, especially decision makers, realize how close we are to this decisive moment. So we can imagine that this is the decision that we will have to make, like to climb or not to climb Everest. And we have three options, in my view. One is that we don't climb. Many people say, so what? Let the AI evolve or expand as it wants. Let it leave us aside. Well, I'm afraid it will be a very, very bad decision, because AI is unlikely to leave us alone. First of all, it will need resources, primarily energy and rare elements. And the other one is that it may consider us like we consider ants, because it will be millions of times more intelligent than any human. And therefore, leaving it alone is a catastrophic decision that we would make. The second option is that we'll do something, and this is what is happening right now. We try to do something, but really, if you look objectively, we are unprepared. And therefore, humans may perish by the end of this century. And then we have the third option, that we climb prepared and we control AI evolving. We would be evolving with it into a new species. And that is probably the best and the only option that we have if we want to not to share the fate of the previous 5 or 6 hominids who have perished before us, as 99% of other species. So, but to minimize that risk that we may be overwhelmed by AI or AGI, we have to control artificial narrow intelligence, which we have now, before it becomes AGI. And you may ask, why? Because we can compare the current threat to an escalating conflict between two species. I think it may not be an exaggeration that we may be approaching an existential confrontation if things go very, very badly. We may try, if things get out of control, there may be a year or 2 or 3 where we'll be trying to stop that threat from being realized, fulfilled, but then eventually we may fail. Why? Because if you logically continue this potential development of ideas and improvement in AI, and it becomes smarter than us, that would mean that it is impossible for a much smarter entity not to outsmart the less intelligent one. So that is pretty logical. But whatever we do, however we teach AI in our values, which is, we are sometimes talking about value alignment, at some stage, AGI will be far, far smarter than us, and it will do whatever it wants, including it may deploy its own morality, thinking from a different perspective, almost from a universal perspective, that our morality is absolutely inconsistent, and many people would agree with that. And therefore, well, I invent morality for you, human species, AGI may say. And if that logic is consequentially brought to this point, and AGI emerges within the next 2 or 3 years, this is how much time we have left in order to prime AI with our values and preferences. And that would give us some time, I reckon about 5 to 7 years to 2035, where we may be coexisting with AI, which will have inherited our values and preference and will be very helpful. What happens afterwards, we can only hope that those inferred values and preferences will stay with AI. And I think it's not a hope, it's a kind of a logic that if an entity is extremely intelligent, why should it get rid of something perhaps unique in the universe? In my view, it is highly unlikely. But it is only going to happen if we initially prime it with the right values. Because if it is especially not properly prepared for being released, that's when the catastrophe may occur. And this is precisely the objective of the AI safety summits, to deliver safe AI by controlling its goals and behaviors. And this brings me to the AI safety summits. What are they? It all started in Korea, in Japan in May 2023, where G7 agreed so-called Hiroshima AI process. This was the first time when the G7 recognized that AI can be a real threat. Why it happened in May, I'll come to that in a minute. But the events in the second quarter of 2023 developed extremely fast. So first we had the memorandum, or we had an invitation coming from the Future of Life Institute to postpone AI for 6 months. And I'll show you who signed that memorandum. Overall, there was over 100,000 AI specialists and researchers. And that probably has influenced G7 to take this on the G7 agenda in Hiroshima. And then towards the end of May 2023, just to remind you, that was just half a year after the release of the first GPT-3, 3.5, as they call it. The first GPT appeared on the 30th of November 2022. So that was probably the reason why we had the Hiroshima process. And from there, in June 2023, Rishi Sunak urgently met Biden, and they agreed that the world will have the first proper AI safety summit at Bletchley Park. David and I were there on the preceding day, and it was quite an optimistic event. I remember it still today. It resulted in so-called Bletchley Declaration. There were 48 countries there, but one of the countries that wasn't represented by the head of state was France, about which in a minute, more in a minute. Then we had in May 2024 the Seoul conference. Frontier AI safety commitments were produced there. And November 2024, there was a San Francisco conference on AI safety network, where AI Safety Institute's network was born. And in France, last week, on 11th of June, AI Action Summit instead of Safety Summit ended. So that's about the AI Safety Summit. So how could we minimize the AI existential threat? I mentioned that in it was in April, I think, or yes, in April, there was a letter signed by those 100,000 AI specialist researchers. On the list here, you can see Yoshua Bengio, probably one of the most recognized names in AI, the founder and now director of the UK AI Safety Institute, which has been renamed just a few days ago to AI Security Institute. Stuart Russell, another well-known professor, Elon Musk was the signatory, Steve Wozniak, and so on. I signed that declaration as well, but then I regretted it. Yeah, that didn't matter, but it's just I changed my view. And I call, well, from that declaration, what has happened, kind of a post-AI camp, I call it, has emerged, which is now really headed by Professor Stuart Russell with Max Tegmark, the chairman of Future of Life Institute, also being there. And they went to Paris, and David was in Paris, and you learn firsthand, perhaps, of his observation how that meeting went. I was at the two-day conference, post-summit conference last week, where I also met Professor Ho, who was a member of the UK delegation, and I can tell you that she was shocked about what happened in Paris and how chaotic all those events were organized. But David may share something, some more in the question time. So the second camp, which I called a consolidated AI camp, actually fulfilled my my suggestion that I made in several of my books, but especially in the last one, Prevail or Fail, mainly that I should be only one global center of AI development. That's what happened in January this year, the Stargate project, where apparently 500 billion pounds will be invested, which is headed by OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank, is not what I thought, because I thought it would be under international control or supervision. It may still happen, but at the moment it isn't. If you look at this poster, you can see OpenAI, SoftBank, but ominously in the middle, you can see Trump. This is just unbelievable how the American politics has been joined by the richest people on the planet. But this is a separate political issue about which I'll be talking in March. So you won't be surprised that I joined that camp, and I wrote an article in November, 2 months before the Stargate was introduced, which was titled, "Don't Be Afraid of a New Manhattan Project for AI." And I think the reason why the Stargate happened was that commission, the bipartisan committee in the States, which, fearing the influence of China, or perhaps fearing the competition from China, suggested that a new Manhattan Project was created. I don't share the enthusiasm for resurrecting the name Manhattan Project, but I was a supporter of this initiative and the consolidation AI, for the sheer reason that this is probably better than any other option. Ideally, it should be under the international supervision, and hopefully it will one day be. So consolidating growth into a single global hub may lead to building a benevolent superintelligence, and obviously evolution of the human species. And that was the subject of my fourth book, Becoming a Butterfly, which was dedicated totally to human evolution. So if you are lucky and we are able to control AI effectively, then I believe that after a period of coexistence, we will enter the area of transition, where the first transhumans will emerge, and David will probably tell you a little bit more about transhumans, because this goes back 20 years at least back. Yeah. But anyway, I visualize those transhumans initially, at least, not having implants in the brain, as for instance the case now with Neuralink, Elon Musk, but by some external devices, so-called brain-computer interfaces. These could be glasses, very likely, because that's what some old man recently alluded to, or even earpods, which China has produced, which would read your thoughts and expand your memory millions of times, because you'll be able to access the internet by thought alone. And that may happen in the next few years, I would say. The question is whether we'll be able to suppress the noise from the signal of the brain. And apparently we need around 3,000 more accurate devices in order for this to become effective. So how Paris and Munich summits impact the delivery of a safer AI, AGI. So let me just list what happened. First of all, in Paris, instead of AI Safety Summit, we got AI Action Summit. The second element which defines the Paris Summit was the USA reluctance to commit to global AI governance, and that's why US didn't sign the declaration. The third one, which was out of the blue almost, was the India's influence, or growing influence, an example how the non-Western actors may enter the question of shaping AI policy. Apparently, India, who will be chairing the next AI summit, prepared with Macron the draft of the resolution, and that draft was leaked to the press before it was finally agreed. It all was supposed to be absolutely clandestine. It didn't work, but it shows you how dirty politics and the AI come together. The other element at the Paris summit was Keir Starmer's absence. This, in my view, proves that he himself, and generally the UK, doesn't really know how to approach AI as a strategic concept that could revive decisively our economy and make Britain really great. That's what Rishi Sunak intended in Bletchley Park, but obviously they were just words. There wasn't any real concept, and I think we are still at the same place. Why, in my view, Keir Starmer didn't come to Paris? In my view, he reciprocated the absence of Macron at Bletchley Park. It's this silly playing of egos, because Keir Starmer wasn't abroad at that time. He was in the UK, so he could have easily come to Paris. And the final thing was that I think overall it indicates that global coordination on AI safety is weakening. Munich conference reflects what geopolitics is about under Trump. We had Mr. Vance preaching to all the leaders of major countries in a despicable way, although some of his critique is justified, absolutely justified, the way that he put it and the arrogance was absolutely unheard of, at least after the Second World War. So the Munich conference was characterized by appeasement of Russia, which will gradually translate into a similar division between, say, Europe and the US regarding the AI safety policy. Now, AI in Munich, and to some extent, in Munich, has refocused now on how AI could be used in cyber warfare and in autonomous use of AI. So you could have self-controlled autonomous robots which could fire munition and make decisions on their own. Actually, this has been happening at on the South North Korean border already for at least a year or two. So overall, the world, in my view, has become less safe than just a week ago. Now the question is, why are we in such a messy situation? And my answer is perhaps a provocative one. It's the rise of populism, and less provocative, this is a crisis of democracy. Because you think why Trump has become a president, a criminal, being the president of the biggest democratic country, is just incredible. But that's what we are witnessing. So I would define populism as a political approach that claims that they represent the ordinary people, not those elites. And those elites really are only making a situation to better themselves rather than average breadwinner. But why do we have something like that? I think it hasn't happened just in the last 10, 15 years. It has been with us since the dawn of humanity. And anybody that has heard about the Maslow's pyramid of needs may see that it neatly explains the root cause of populism. I have gathered a lot of information for this slide. There's more than I have quoted here on what is most important in numbers. Actually, only 1 to 5% are really interested, or is for them most important, which is self-actualization. Esteem, it's about 10 to 40%. Security, stability, not surprisingly, 60 to 80%. And you'll be even less surprised when you learn that 100%, 400% of population is the most important issue. Now, how about the central one? Love, belonging. It's around 40 to 60%. And what does it tell you? This explains why in many countries we have presidential elections or referenda which oscillate around that number, around 50%, precisely for this reason, that in the middle of the human yearnings for betterment is love and belonging, which means understanding other people's needs. Obviously, this is assuming that your basic needs have already been fulfilled. But anyway, especially in the Western countries, this is the population that understands the other's position and wants to do something. But unfortunately, they are always in minority or close to minority. And that is the reason why I believe most referenda and presidential election oscillate around the middle of the pyramid. because those with wider, more inclusive perspectives usually lose. Why? Because fear of change is an evolutionary trait. We simply love what we know. But my final conclusion is that what happens more often now regarding populism is that the truth is undermined by false propaganda at the scale unprecedented in the history. There's AI manipulation in it, AI influencers, the pace of change, thanks to AI, among others, and because of the internet, almost immediate global reach. And that's where we are now. So you may wonder, what might be the solution to fight the widespread populism? I'll be talking about it in the second part next month, but since I raised the subject, this is an exception. I only do a few points explaining how I think this may actually help to resolve this issue. So the first thing is to abandon referenda. I remember how Tony Blair, for most of his tenure, was refusing to do referenda on the EU. And he kept his word, and the Labour Party didn't fall under the pressure to make EU referendum. So, and the reason that he didn't do that was that he understood that such complex issues cannot be decided by people who have very little knowledge. Some of you may know that from the statistics available, around 15% of the electorate that participated in the British Brexit referendum were illiterate, as defined by the agency that, well, actually they wouldn't be able to understand a simple council form, for instance. That's what roughly is defined as illiterate. So how could they understand the problems in the European Union? And we, and I am passionate about that, we say that every vote should be equal. It shouldn't. It is the French Revolution that has misleadingly introduced this, apart from fraternité and liberté, they introduced this notion of equality. Equality was meant to the possessions initially, so that no one has super privilege and unjustified wealth. But it has, over the 2.5 centuries, been translated that we are all equal in every respect. How false is that? That means that
That's a key point.
if you go to your workplace, right, you have the right to be a director, even you have no qualifications. Why do we have different salaries and different tasks to do? Because we are not equal in terms of our abilities. And hence, we are not equal in terms of assessing the threats, dangers, and so on.
Yes.
And that is the reason why I support so-called weighted voting. It's an agenda too long to take it up today, but I will mention it next time. So that will be the first thing. The second thing is that we should make constitutional changes and major decisions only by citizens' assembly.
Yeah, this is a great notion.
Through to which random citizens would be elected, and they will be debating the issues for months, as it happened, for instance, in the famous Irish Citizens' Assembly of 2012, deciding on the abortion, the gay rights, and so on, which actually was gathering for a whole year. Only then those randomly selected people may realize what the problems are, or pros and cons and so on. So this is a no-brainer, and this is, in my view, a low-hanging fruit. So the major decisions should be decided by citizens, but not with the majority of 50%, but in my view, 60%. That's so that the minority view is also included in the final judgment. So we have to include in the compromise the views of the minority stronger than now, because now a simple majority, like it happened with Brexit, leads to very, very bad decisions that no one is really satisfied. The third point is that the double majority voting should be applied for multinational citizen assembly, like in our country, right? Now, 5 nations, and we should have a double majority of 60% of the representatives and 60% of the nations agreeing on a given decision. And finally, it wouldn't be surprising that the presidential elections should not be decided with a 50% majority, but 60% of the votes in stages. I mean, it is a complex issue how to do that. But again, this is in order to break out of the Maslow pyramid of needs, of that center that is undecisive. We have to take the view of the minority into account. Now, almost final slide. Why I'm still mildly optimistic about the future. You remember this? Munich 1938? And do you remember this? Pearl Harbor, right? So that was the Second World War. And now we have Ukrainian war, Kiev, just 4 days, in 4 days we will have the 3rd anniversary. And we had Munich 2. So why do I present those 4 facts? Because I think only when humans touch the danger, the real danger, they then make difficult decisions. That's what happened at Pearl Harbor, when America was directly hit and impacted, that Roosevelt then had an easy go in the Congress and the Senate and declared the war, opposing to join as Churchill begged him for 2 years. I think the Munich conference may be, it's too early to say, but it may be such an event that we, the Europeans in this case, we realize how dangerous the situation is, and we ourselves have to take responsibility for that. Just for those who may not be following the news, you know that there was a conference in Paris yesterday. Guess what? There is another conference tomorrow. This is how fast events are developing. And this is mimicking Trump. We have to make decisions in days and not in months or years. For instance, if you look at our government, what kind of decisions are made in 4 or 5 years' time? Like, for instance, what to do with NHS takes 4 years to debate. This is preposterous. And we just accept this. Okay, so that's what I had to say. And what I think might be the result of Munich 2 is the fulfillment of the Churchill's idea of the United States of Europe. I think we may not have a formal federation. We may not even need it. So that's why the United States of Europe is in quotes. But you can see the writing is on the wall, that Europe will have its own defense forces, already has its own currency, no borders, and perhaps the foreign policy. Right. And I finish here to give you a say on what you just heard. Who is first?
Well done, Tony. That's the first thing. It's a good picture. Good picture. Lots of thoughts going on there. I don't feel like distilling anything yet, but it's a lot of food for thought. Not sure about everything that you've said, but certainly I can see the join-ups. And I'd probably leave it at that. I'm sort of pondering still. Maybe you can see smoke coming out my head, kind of working out about this. Some doubts about some aspects, but I'd like to hear others first.
Okay. John, you want to say something?
Thank you, Tony, for saying that it's a brilliant presentation. It's really good. Requires a lot of thought, though. Well, you've already done a lot of thought, but it requires us to think about it a lot as well. Well done. And thank you.
So who wants to be next? David? Food for thought? About that child with a pistol and the child with flowers, right? This shows where our civilization has gone wrong. Yeah, okay, sorry. Who wants it? David?
Well, let me say, this is such a big topic, and it's not surprising that members of the audience are hesitant to bite off a chunk and comment on it. So I want to thank you for setting such a big topic on the table. And rather than pick points where I may see things differently, and there are certainly areas where I have different conclusions from you, I just want to underscore some points where I totally agree. AI is fast changing, and what it's done in the last few years, waking people up with ChatGPT and enhancements to it, to the ability to create convincing pictures and then convincing videos, its ability to come up with quite interesting jokes, quite good music. A lot of new drugs have been discovered by AI that are quite counterintuitive. So it's doing a lot of things and it's improving fast, and it's a general purpose technology. You said it's not really a technology, it's an intelligence. Well, we can say it's a general purpose technology. It's a bit like electricity. It doesn't just change one machine in one place in a room. It changes everything. Like the steam engine. The steam engine was initially thought of as something that might help to pump water out of mines more effectively. And it turns out that industry after industry was changed by steam, and then there were trains. Computers, initially, famously, head guy in IBM thought there might be the need for 5 big computers in the world, and that would be sufficient. And other leading computer theorists didn't imagine that people would want computers at home. What would people do with computers at home? It turns out they can do everything. But AI is even more powerful than all of that, and it has the ability, as you pointed out, Tony, to catastrophically change our lives. You talked about AI becoming a new species and having different goals from us, in the same way that we humans have caused mass extinctions because we had different desires for the environment than the other creatures that we share the planet with. But it's also catastrophically dangerous because, let's say, some bad people or some naive people or some depressed people or some mentally ill people can use AI to do the kinds of things they might use knives or motor cars or airplanes to do today. You know, some people drive motor cars into groups of others just because they're angry with the world, because they're fed up with the world in some way. There's a guy in China who was upset with his divorce proceedings. He thought he was unfairly treated, so he drove his car again and again over a group of participants at a sports meeting and killed 35. Now, AI could do much worse than that. AI could lead to the likes of Kim Jong-un, who already has done many bad things in the world. He unleashed ransomware attacks so he could try and make more money for his cyber hackers. He had his half-brother assassinated at Kuala Lumpur airport by two different people rubbing different chemicals on his face, and they reacted together. Imagine what he could do with AI. And imagine if more people are fed up and angry because of AI. And you talked about the boy in the cartoon, instead of going to his teacher with a bunch of flowers, he's going to a teacher with a gun. Why are more people angry? In part, it's AI, or rather it's social media encouraged by AI, because people found out they can make money by helping others to be angry online. And when they're angry online, they click, 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 and they cause more money to be made by the people who get the clicks. And so we are driven into this rather sad state. And more people hate their political opponents than before. It used to be that if the son or daughter of a Republican couple wanted to marry a Democrat, they might be a bit upset, but they wouldn't be against it. But if you tell somebody today, a Trump supporter's child, if they want to marry a Biden supporter's, that's horrifically bad news, and vice versa too. So there's much more anger and division. So this is being stirred up by an outrage industrial complex, which is using AI to do terrible things. Do we have to have a disaster to change our minds? Don't think necessarily. And I'm not in favor of us having a disaster because it might spin out of control. And if there is a disaster, an AI version of 9/11, an AI Chernobyl, or an AI lab leak version of COVID, the people might blame each other for it, and it might lead to an even worse war. So I'd rather we have a disaster in mind rather than a disaster in reality. And I point to how we climbed back in the 1980s from a spiraling nuclear weapons race. Part of it was that Reagan and Gorbachev were quite interesting people who were prepared in the end to think differently, but part of it was because a scientist called Carl Sagan, who I also describe as a futurist, he worked out with some colleagues that if there was just a limited exchange of nuclear weapons, it wouldn't just be that hundreds of millions of people would die because of heat and radiation. There'd be enough dust stirred up in the atmosphere to shut out the light from the sun. A bit like the extinction of the dinosaurs, which had only been worked out in the early 1980s as being caused by a meteorite. So he took that theories and published it, and the hawks behind Reagan and the hawks in the Kremlin both said, oh my goodness, this is worse than we thought. And they agreed ultimately to wind down their nuclear weapons program significantly, not completely, but significantly. So I like to think that if we futurists, Tony, myself, and others, can point to quite credible ways in which AI could do terrible things, we're not going to uninvent it, but we can control it. And just in the same way that some nuclear weapons have been controlled, some biological weapons have been controlled, some other human technologies like human cloning have been controlled, even though we could do it. So I like to think that humanity can steer AI so that AI doesn't have all the bad consequences we talked about, but instead can be a good tool. So there's some minor disagreements with Tony, but ultimately I'm saying he's entirely right to say this topic should be discussed much more often. And I agree with him, it was a mistake for Keir Starmer not to go to Paris. He had his own reasons. He's been criticized by the Daily Mail ad infinitum for going abroad all the time. So he decided he'd better have a visit with King Charles instead to do whatever he'd planned. So that was a mistake. He should have gone there. It's not the end of the world. I think he will waken up and he will work with Macron and the leader of Poland as well, who has just met with them in Paris and a few others. So I like to think that Europe will step up, not just to have more regulations, but actually hurry up and build good, safe AI tools like Yoshua Bengio is suggesting, AI as a scientist rather than AI as an autonomous, almost conscious being.
Can I ask Tony a question? I'm trying to get since I can't, for some reason I'm not on the screen. I don't know why, but I'm not. I used to be, but anyway, I'm not on it now. The question I have, this is Stephen Cooney speaking. The question I have for Tony, I was a little surprised. You didn't say anything at all about DeepSeek. And DeepSeek is the real game changer, supposedly. if it works. And I don't know if it does work. I don't know what the fundamental issues are with DeepSeek, but that supposedly is a huge difference, and DeepSeek may democratize the whole issue of maybe. I don't know really what the fundamentals of it are, but apparently the Chinese are frankly somewhat upset about it because it wasn't the route they were going, and it was an individual guy from China who actually came up with the principles behind DeepSeek, and which is a much cheaper and quicker format for what they call LLMs, large language models. But I wonder if Tony could comment on it, and what do you think is the role of DeepSeek, and anyone else, David or anyone else who can address this subject?
Very briefly, Stephen, this is a different level of AI. DeepSeek is at the level of OpenAI or free, say, more or less. Yes, it's okay that it has reached that kind of intelligence using far fewer resources. But I didn't mention this on none of the chatbots or AI solutions, because I would like to cover it in April, when I'll be talking about what to do specifically about containing AI as an existential threat. So let me leave it like that now, and let's discuss this existential threat that AI is posing. DeepSeek does not pose that threat yet. There may be other versions and so on. I'm not denying the China's potential influence, but since you raised the subject, in my view, the Chinese will not prevail over the West in the ultimate superintelligence development. And my contention is that in order to develop superintelligence, or even super AGI, if you like, or immature intelligence, as I sometimes call it, you have to present to it the true world. As long as you inject biases, especially political bias and so on, you will get wrong answers, wrong decisions. So in longer term, this wouldn't just stand. And finally, to have the ultimate output from scientists, they must be free. If scientists are constrained, they won't produce that kind of results as the Western scientists produce. That doesn't deny Chinese the benefit of the doubt to some extent, proving that I was wrong, like with DeepSeek. But we are talking at the ultimate level of the human abilities, which can only be manifesting themselves if they are not constrained by untruth or any other constraints like political constraints. David, you raised the hand.
Well, I'm happy for Paul to go first, since he hasn't spoken yet.